My cat Freddie loves to be brushed and cuddled. But stirring up his cat allergens meant sneezing and itchy eyes. Then I found Purina One Live Clear. It's cat food that reduced the major allergen and my suffering in as little as 21 days. Now, we feel closer than ever. If you have issues with cat allergens, you really need to try Purina One Live Clear.
Try new Purina One Live Clear today. Purina One, a difference from day one.
Quiet Riot.
Welcome to Quiet Riot Midnight Mass. I'm Alex.
And I'm Naomi.
Now, we thought we'd get together to share a quick reaction, some thoughts on what's been a pretty momentous day on the Brexit journey, I would say. Not necessarily in terms of outcomes, but certainly in terms of a change of diplomatic atmospherics. What do you think, Naomi?
Yeah, I mean, I wrote an op-ed for LBC that went up earlier today, basically saying if this is a Eurovision from Starmer, then it's 12 points on the diplomacy and quite a long way to go on economic growth.
Okay, so what was in there that you found encouraging?
Well, very encouraging that a lot of talk is there about dynamic alignment. This is with reference specifically to the agri-food deal and the emissions trading scheme. They're the kind of two big ticket sectors that were talked about today and are in the detail of what's been published. But I think that's a good portent for the alignment we're going to need on other sectors of the economy if government is going to grow the economy. The numbers on what was agreed today in terms of how that will nudge the dial on the economy are negligible. I mean, we're talking 0.0 something percent, about a 30th of that OBR figure of the 4% GDP we've lost. So in terms of will this suddenly make us all feel a lot richer? Absolutely not. But on the optics and the moving forward in the right direction, as you say, the atmospherics and the tone change, it was really very, very good.
Yeah, what I would point out, there is a lot in this deal that's not yet finalized. There is a lot in this deal that's aspirational, effectively, and some that is... There are quite a few chunks that are agreed between the leadership, if that makes sense, but now need to be operationalized, which is a particular process in Europe.
That's right. So the political agreement is there, and now the official legal agreement needs to be hammered out, and that might require a fresh mandate from the EU Commission for parts of it as we go through the summer and into next year when the actual trade and cooperation agreement gets renegotiated.
So was there any way for that to have been avoided, I guess, is what I'm asking? Could they have done...
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. But, everything and anything is kind of always possible in politics. I think the UK were pretty late in coming to the table with what they actually wanted out of all of this. That's something we've talked about on the show before. And certainly when I've come back from Brussels with my dispatches from those trips, that's the feeling that you were getting from them. It's like, well, tell us what you want. We can't really begin hammering much out until you've nailed your colours to the mast, UK government. So yes, more could have been done. But, as I said when we recorded the show last week, that broad three packages, the things we were expecting, definitely defence and security element in package 1, then SPS and the stuff to begin negotiating immediately in package 2, and then the package 3 stuff of, okay, we're not going to begin negotiating it right now, but we would like to. I mean, broadly, that has all come to pass today. Good stuff about Erasmus Plus being included. That was a pretty late entrant into the negotiations. And I think quite a bit of surprise about things like the length of extension for fishing quotas. So I know that's something that you want to talk quite a bit about. I jumped on a brief call earlier with a Labour MP to get their rapid reaction. It's Andrew Lewin. He's the MP for Welwyn Hatfield, and he was the one that coordinated the letter from all of those backbench MPs. There was about 62 of them, I think, in the end, to the government calling for the youth mobility scheme. When 3 weeks ago, even, the government were not moving much on youth mobility. I mean, very, very tentatively. And it really was after that letter was published that we began to then hear much more positive mood music from ministers on it.
Quiet Riot.
Now, Andrew, you coordinated that really impactful letter a month or so ago. I think you got 62 Labour MPs to write to the government in support of a youth mobility scheme, amongst a range of other things in that letter. Tell me, how are you and your fellow colleagues that signed that letter feeling right now?
Naomi, great to chat. And look, I think it's fair to say we are feeling very upbeat and positive. And speaking personally, I think this is one of the best days in the job since I had the privilege of being elected. We'll start on youth mobility because I think this was in some doubt. You know, a couple of months ago, the language being used by the government was somewhat different to where we are today. So I am really pleased both that we took the action that we did with that public letter about 3 weeks ago. But most importantly, I'm really pleased that the government has listened and it's seen the benefits of a youth mobility scheme. Whether we call it youth mobility or youth experience, as the text in the deal says, doesn't matter to me too much. What matters is the principle of saying it is a good thing that we're going to look again at giving young people in this country the opportunity to live, work, study in the EU and vice versa. And I think after so much bad news over so many years, for those of us who consider themselves pro-European, today is a really significant moment.
Absolutely. And I love that they've called it the Youth Experience Scheme, because then the acronym is YES. And we're saying yes to yes. So absolutely brilliant. And, you know, you and I both had those opportunities when we were younger, and the thought of it being denied to a whole other generation of people was just unbearable. And now not only are they going to get that experience, but those that qualify could also now apply for Erasmus Plus. That was a bit of an unexpected benefit from today. Was there anything else that, you know, leapt out at you as being a particularly good thing that happened today?
You're right. I consider that a real bonus, and for younger people, perhaps people still formally in education, to be able to benefit from Erasmus Plus again would be really significant. So I echo that. What else was positive? I thought it was really good to hear about cooperation on an emissions trading scheme. You know, climate change is the defining challenge of our generation. It would be perverse to continue with a situation where the UK and the EU has different schemes, conflicting schemes on emissions. So practical, common sense measures to align on those, I think, is absolutely right. And I'm really glad that the government is pursuing it. And look, the SPS deal, which will get a lot of headlines, I think is so important as well, particularly for SMEs. You know, Naomi, you and I have spent quite a lot of time looking at the detail of how the economy has been damaged by the deal this government inherited. And it is always so striking that it's the smaller businesses, the smaller exporters, flooded with extra paperwork, bureaucracy, and in many cases, unable to continue trading, or certainly not at the level they had previously. So an SPS deal that strips away those barriers in the agri-food sector is going to make a material difference to communities across the country.
I agree. And, anything that can help ease the cost of living crisis has got to be welcomed. Now, the government have made growth their big ambition. What's your feel on how well the government is doing on that front in light of this deal? Will this get us any growth, much growth, or is it kind of paving the way to potentially negotiating better trading terms for other sectors of the economy beyond agri-food that might get us some really big numbers coming into the Treasury coffers?
I think it's the right question. I think it's a starting point, but a really important starting point. So the SPS deal will make a material difference. I've seen the Salmon Trade Association of Scotland already come out and welcome it, and the Meat Processors Association. So, trade bodies in that food export market will see a benefit, hopefully in the short term, which is great. I would also mention briefly the enhanced cooperation on defence and the potential for UK defence companies to benefit from the SAFE fund. But you're right to ask the question and say, is this enough for a fundamental change in the economy? I'd say not yet, but I thought perhaps the most striking interview of the weekend was Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor, in The Guardian on Saturday, where she was really clear that she saw this as the start of a process. And I took great heart from that. There's been a commitment from the government to annual summits, and this feels like the first step on a road to recovery, and a lot more potential for greater cooperation on the economy as we go forward.
Now, help me out with one thing, Andrew. Betrayal. That is the big word. We've heard Farage using it. We've heard Badenoch using it. They're saying that this goes against the will of the people, but the people voted in July 2024 in a general election. And from that election, a government was elected with its mandate, all of its manifesto commitments, stopping short of rejoining the single market, the customs union, no return to freedom of movement. They were saying it before the detail of the deal today was even published. They couldn't possibly have known, but they've doubled down on it since. How do you respond to people that jump on that bandwagon of saying, you've sold us out?
Well, look, it's sort of the greatest hits from the Leave campaign, isn't it? But the truth is the Leave campaign is 9 years old. And this deal is about moving forward. I have to say, Kemi Badenoch in particular, to immediately come out with that line, calling it betrayal, and her emphasis was particularly on the fishing sector, is extraordinary, because what this actually did is roll over the fishing deal that her government signed. So she's saying it's a betrayal that we've carried on with the deal that she already had in place. Now, actually, we could have gone further today with a 360 million fund for coastal communities. But I would say there's a bigger picture here, that we had a similar reaction from the Conservatives and Reform to the UK-India trade deal. It demonstrates to me that they are not serious about engaging with the world. They want to turn inward. They think it might get them a few headlines in the Daily Express and the Daily Mail. But if they are serious about governing, they have to be serious about trading relationships all across the world, not least with the European Union, our single biggest trading partner. So I think let's take that argument on. As a Labour MP, I'm proud that we're a pro-European internationalist party, and I'm not at all scared of the surrender narrative or Marc Francois, as he was last week, waving his white handkerchief in the House of Commons.
Andrew, thank you so much for giving us 5 minutes of your time. I know you've got to rush off to a very important meeting with the Prime Minister, so we won't keep you any longer, but promise that you'll come back on soon and give us a fuller interview.
Happily, and keep up all the great work, Naomi.
Right, so you mentioned that I wanted to say something about fishing.
Please go ahead.
I mean, the first thing to say is that I have seen positive reaction from the meat industry, even some of the fishing industry, like salmon.
Scottish salmon, yeah.
I've seen positive reaction from shellfish exporters. I've seen positive reaction from the banking industry. I've seen positive reaction from most major supermarkets. I've seen positive reaction from the CBI. I've even seen a tentatively positive reaction from the National Farmers Union. It's quite extraordinary to me that we know every single front page and headline tomorrow will be about fishing.
Betrayal of the fishing industry.
So that's the first thing to say. It's entirely blown out of all proportion. The second thing to say is that this is just an extension of the terms in place by the previous government in the Johnson deal. Now, they were due to expire automatically next year in June.
Yep.
And it seemed to be common wisdom floating around at the moment that the British government was asking for 4 years and they ended up conceding 12. That doesn't sound right to me. Instinctively, that sounds wrong to me. Because I don't think that the British government would have wanted fishing to be an issue at the next election. Anything but.
Yep.
It would either go quite a bit shorter or quite a bit longer. So 4 years as a tentative ask seems wrong to me. I think that was always a much more floating target. And the second thing to say is that the EU have reduced their fishing quotas by a quarter since that deal was done in 2019. Has the British fishing industry expanded by that amount? The answer is no. It's barely expanded at all. There is a less than 10% growth in the fishing industry, and all of it is in far sea fishing, Atlantic mackerel and things like that. There is almost no growth in the near coastal fishing, which is what we're talking about here when we're talking about, betrayal of coastal communities.
Which have now got a £360 million injection from the government as part of this package.
Exactly, to regenerate. And will benefit from easier exporting of shellfish, because one of the main reasons there has been no expansion
is because they can't sell their stock into the EU.
Exports have collapsed. Exports to the EU have collapsed, which means that any expansion is pointless because there's very little scope to sell that stuff.
And we don't eat what we catch.
Yeah.
Here in the UK, we like things like cod. We don't catch that within British waters very easily at all. And the stuff we do catch, a lot of those shellfish that you mentioned and things like sand eels, the Brits get very squeamish about anything like that and don't really buy it in any significant number. So you can't make up the lost EU trade with a domestic market.
Two more factors that feed into this. The first is our unclean waters, which is something that needs to be sorted out really, really pronto, because big fishing areas, especially for mussels, were excluded from being able to export into the EU at all in the last few years because the water is so dirty. And the second thing, of course, is lack of seasonal labour. The last year that I've seen figures for, which was 2022, 15,000 tons of fish remained in the sea because there was no staff available to fillet them.
Yep.
And so I look at all of that and I think 12 years is just great. Because there is a lot of stuff to sort out domestically for this market to grow, to expand, to fill what is already becoming available, which it's not doing at the moment. To scupper a deal on really quite significant stuff like access to the EU defence procurement and things like Erasmus Plus and a youth mobility scheme. And, to scupper all of that for fishing would be ridiculous enough. But to scupper it for fictitious fishing, for fishing that isn't happening,
Oh,
would
fish.
be the absolute height of absurdity, in my view. And so take the time. Let's not keep arguing about this every couple of years. Let's not keep reopening this wound. Let's establish some trust. Let's establish a better functioning relationship. Let's sort out our water. Let's sort out seasonal labor. Let's sort out SPS. Let's sort out exporting. Let's sort out our internal logistics. Let's sort out all of that. And if we find that at the end of the 12 years, our fishing industry has expanded by a quarter, which I very much doubt it will, because my instinct tells me that young British people don't want to go into the fishing industry very much for the same reasons that they don't want to go into social care, because it's poorly paid and very, very hard work. So if we get there and find that we have expanded to that extent, let's renegotiate the quotas down.
Quiet Riot. Now, this is an advertisement for BetterHelp Therapy Online, who are sponsoring today's episode. A huge thank you to them. And I just want to tell you a little bit more about what they offer and their service. Maintaining our mental health is, of course, just as important as taking care of our physical health. And while I've seen societal values on therapy shift, there is still a lot of work to be done. For example, in a recent UK survey, 37% of participants said they feel uncomfortable discussing mental health concerns due to a fear of judgment. That stigma keeps many of us from seeking help. And it doesn't just affect us, but our families, workplaces, and communities. And yet it seems that the vast majority of us do recognise how important it is. In that very same survey, 85% value mental health just as much as physical, and 78% believe supporting it is vital to our well-being. At Quiet Riot, we know therapy isn't just for navigating trauma, it's a tool for growth. It teaches us how to cope with things. It helps set healthy boundaries in our relationships and empowers us to become the best version of ourselves. It's learning to thrive, not just survive. If you're ready to take a step towards better mental health, BetterHelp is here. As the largest online therapy provider in the world, BetterHelp can provide access to mental health professionals with a diverse variety of expertise. We're all better with help. And our listeners get 10% off their first month at betterhelp.com/Quiet Riot. That's better, HELP.com/Quiet Riot. And our big thanks once again to BetterHelp for supporting the show. Quiet Riot. I agree. I am, though, going to throw a slight curveball into the discussion about why we are getting so much headline news about fish and betrayal, and that narrative is being thrown at government ministers by journalists. Of course, we'd expect it from Farage and others, but I would hope that the media would have had something else to focus on. So I've been mulling on this over the course of the day. And if we wind back the clock, even 48 hours, but certainly this time last week, we were expecting defence to be the really massive big ticket item of today. And while it was very much there, it wasn't highlighted in quite the way we were anticipating.
Mm-hmm.
And I've not seen, and you listed all of the trade bodies and companies that you've seen row out in support, certainly of the SPS stuff today. Defence sector has been quite quiet. I haven't seen sort of major pronouncements welcoming it from the big defence companies, and I did a little bit of digging, not loads, and maybe by the time this goes out, more of them will have come forward. There was, one or two quoted on a couple of small news bulletins, but in checking Twitter feeds and things like that for press releases, I haven't seen much. And I think that's because there was maybe not quite as much clarity on whether the UK arms manufacturers will get access to PESCO and the big EU Defence Fund and
Safe.
all of that safe. So in a way, that not being as huge a feature of today's announcements as was anticipated has kind of left a little bit of room for other topics to be seized on. And it certainly felt like yet another little misstep by government comms.
I think the defence stuff being woolly is purely down to the fact that the defence stuff is still woolly. I think it's the EU that expects it to be much further ahead in their thinking, but actually the financial instrument for approving the loans that, the scheme is about has only just been conceived. So with EU being so far behind in its construction of the framework, it is no surprise to me that they couldn't be definitive about what precisely the UK's participation in it will be. But the fundamental reason it's not more fleshed out is that it isn't fleshed out for anyone yet.
No, but neither is SPS, and you have had, as you say, NFU and others coming out to bat for that. So in the same way that maybe defence isn't totally fleshed out, I haven't seen the commensurate applause that you would have expected potentially from that area. So while I take your point, I think there is a bit of imbalance from what government were hoping and expecting could happen from today. And that has in itself created a little bit more space for journalists to ask about other things that are a big distraction.
Yeah, I take your point fully. I think journalists would have been asking about fish, whatever else was in the agreement, because that is what they've been doing for the last however many decades. It's become the totemic issue. It never gets questioned. No one will explain what I just explained, that our fishing industry, our fishing sector has not even expanded to take up what is available.
There are more people who are yoga instructors in the UK than work in the fishing industry. It's worth about 0.03% of GDP. Now, that's not to say that the societal impact of fishing on their communities doesn't far outstrip its economic value in aggregate for the UK. They do play a critical role, and I think it's incredibly welcome that this Coastal Community Fund is now going to be there for them. That's well overdue, and well done, government, for doing it. But you're right, like the proportionality in any analysis of UK-EU talks about fish is just not there at all. It gets far too much focus.
I'm not one of those people for whom the fundamental point is that the fishing industry is an irrelevance economically.
No, of course not.
Because everything is an irrelevance if you make the scale large enough. But these things are important to the people who make a living out of them. They're important to the people who live in those communities.
Extremely.
And so I would never belittle fishing in that way. I would call for a sense of proportion. But most importantly, I would say that Brexit has shafted the fishing industry in so many ways that giving them back a little bit of quota has been meaningless. That is the story here. That's the real story here. The real story here is not the continuation of the same terms for another 12 years. The real story here is that what was promised was not delivered by Brexit. And that was a land of milk and honey.
And trade declines with distance. Well, if you think it's difficult to get a prawn from Dalgety Bay to Paris, you try getting it to Brisbane or Delhi in time for it to be safely eaten. I mean, it's extremely difficult to do that. I want to know what your hunch is around all of the other sectors, whether you think there is hope for that. I mean, I'm hearing that the EU Commission is saying going further than just agri will be an uncomfortable negotiation on the EU side. So manufacturing and even services. There was some stuff in there about professional qualification recognition, which was pleasing to see. Not very much at all for touring artists. So in terms of the broader suite of stuff that we know the UK economy desperately needs, what's your feeling of the vibes from today about whether that is just a bit too far away to start talking about yet, or whether you think there is a cooling of appetite on either side for that stuff?
My sense is exactly the opposite. That, the optics of Starmer standing next to Ursula von der Leyen and both of them extolling the virtue of this partnership were very, very positive, because for the first time, it seemed to me, we weren't overtly talking about the UK as a former EU member.
Yeah.
We were talking about the UK as a potential third-party valuable partner. And whether that was accidental or whether it was deliberate, I suspect the latter, it is very, very welcome to see. It is genuinely looking forward rather than looking backwards.
I went to Lancaster House. I wasn't meant to. I had loads of meetings and I've been doing media since 8 a.m. this morning, and we're recording this at 9 p.m. at night, and I've got more to do afterwards. But I thought, when I knew that they were headed there, I just wanted to be there and see. And I raced up there and had a chance to kind of cheer and welcome them. It really did feel like a very important moment that finally, after the best part of 10 years of awfulness, and of course Lancaster House being the home of that horrific Theresa May speech where she told me I was a citizen of nowhere, and it just felt great to kind of take back the sense of, no, we are friends and you are welcome here.
Yes,
and long may this continue.
Yes, and the reason it's left me very hopeful is really twofold. Firstly, it was a brave thing to do from a prime minister that's not become synonymous with bravery.
Yep.
I thought that the optics and the language and the mood music went a lot further than they needed to, considering what had actually been agreed behind it, right?
Yeah.
Starmer's instinct up until last week would have been to downplay all of this.
Yeah.
So to see it aggrandized tells me that he really intends to go down this road. The second thing that gives me a lot of hope is that we've talked about this a lot, and we've said that everything begins with building trust. And so actually, I don't care if what is in the deal is small or big. I don't care if it's detailed or aspirational. What I do care about is that over the next few months, we can observe whether the two sides drive for it with speed and gusto, or whether they kick it in the long grass, whether they take the PR win from today, here we are, all friends again, and basically do nothing on the substance, or whether they begin to work in earnest for the detailed meat on those bones. And I think that will tell me everything I need to know about this government's direction with regard to the European Union. I welcome that because it's been very unclear so far which way they're going. And for the first time in a very long time, that is the direction they are signaling. A much closer relationship with the EU.
What I'm comforted by is the fact that there has now been a UK-EU commitment to an annual summit. Now, look, we don't need to look very far to things like COP to know that annual summits can be fairly toothless and end up being talking shops. They cannot afford to let that happen. But I don't sense that they do. So that's one thing I'm happy about.
Yeah, I agree.
If you've shopped online, chances are you've bought from a business powered by Shopify. You know that purple Shop Pay button you see at checkout? The one that makes buying so incredibly easy? That's Shopify. And there's a reason so many businesses sell with it, because Shopify makes it incredibly easy to start and run your business. Shopify is the commerce platform behind 10% of all e-commerce in the US. Sign up for your $1 per month trial and start selling today at shopify.com/promo. Go to shopify.com/promo.
The second thing I'm happy about is the Treasury. It is notable how different the ambition in language is from Rachel Reeves and Darren Jones, who is her deputy, effectively chief secretary to the Treasury, on deepening trade links and going further and looking at other sectors beyond agri-food. That's because they know that the growth ain't coming from what was discussed today, emissions, even defence, and agri-food isn't going to grow GDP, but the other stuff can and will. And it is more ambitious than the other ministers are prepared to talk about it. And they're holding the pen on growth, right? It's very much Treasury who've got to deliver. It's their KPI. So they get it. And I think they will be making that case very fully. To your point about, are they going to cash in on this good moment of, look, we're all friends now and let's go further and faster? The Treasury will be the ones pushing that, I think, quite strongly. So I'm very hopeful that they will do that. I am maybe a little bit less hopeful that others around the table will be quite as keen, but we know we've got allies in terms of pro-Europeanism and getting it. And we heard endlessly over the course of the last year, particularly from the Prime Minister, it is a nonsense to think we've got to choose between the US and the EU. You and I always said, you haven't got to choose, but you do have to prioritise. And there really is only one that is worth prioritising in terms of who you can actually rely on to uphold the agreement, and B, in terms of the amount of growth coming from it. But today was a choice to do dynamic alignment with the EU on agri-food is a very strong signal that absolutely not are we going to do much more to deepen the US trade deal, because you couldn't, because of the much lower animal welfare and food standards in the US. So those are the kind of the three things I'm hopeful about: that annual summit, the amount that the Treasury seem to be pushing for it, and then this use of the words dynamic alignment repeatedly throughout the strategic partnership and the publications today on SPS, signalling that we are going to prioritise the EU over the US.
Yeah, and there will be a lot of noise and fury from opposition parties, but I think ultimately this is a trap for them. If things proceed with some pace, and in 4 years' time we are seeing less friction in our trade, we are seeing exports do a bit better, we are seeing the first crop of students take their Erasmus Plus places, we are seeing defense contracts coming our way. If all those things are happening and the opposition are promising to undo this deal, in my mind, that is a huge political miscalculation. And the trap was set, and it is not lost on me that the terrible, inexperienced politician that is Kemi Badenoch walked into it within an hour, promised to undo whatever deal Starmer does. The more experienced politician and the more dangerous one, Nigel Farage, has bewailed the deal as a dreadful one that will signal the end of the fishing industry, but has not said anything of the kind yet. He might, in the coming days, he might focus group and take some soundings and decide that that is an issue on which he could usefully outflank the Conservatives, but he didn't today. And to me, that's quite interesting, that it was Kemi Badenoch that straight away went, we would undo all this.
Yeah.
Because in 4 years' time, if the conditions that I described prevail and the economy is doing a little bit better, the notion that a majority or even a significant minority of voters will want to return to the absolute trauma of the last decade is ridiculous. And I don't think even Brexiters will want it.
No.
Because we know from polling done close to the referendum that the vast majority of them expected a Swiss-type, Norway-type relationship. So if we're now moving towards that, it is actually quite close to even most Brexiters' expectation.
Indeed.
And let Boris Johnson and Daniel Hannan write pieces with their fantasies of BDSM, sexual domination. I don't know if you've seen that. I know you've been busy all day, but both of them have described...
Sadly, I have seen it, Alex, yes.
Yeah. So that is also not a coincidence, I think. For someone who didn't even go to Eton, Naomi, he didn't even go to Eton, Starmer, and he comes in and he does a deal with India and a deal with the US and a better deal with the EU, where they failed. How dare he?
Yeah.
The only possible explanation could be that behind the scenes,
he's not enough.
They dress him up and perform sexual acts on him. I mean, seriously.
In any other workplace, that would be sexual harassment and they'd get fired.
Yeah, pathetic children. And the more this goes on, the more they are revealed as pathetic children. And so I'm actually quite hopeful that once the noise dies down from all the, oh my goodness, fishing betrayed, that will occupy the front pages for the next couple of days, then the industry bodies, all of which are saying, this is a good first step, let's go further, means that business will feel more emboldened to stick its head above the parapet, because they've been awfully quiet so far, and say, this is what we need from you, government, can you get it done? And it will create a feedback loop that means the government is encouraged to make more brave decisions rather than cowardly ones, as it has been making for the last few weeks on many, many topics, including disability benefits, trans rights, immigration. Might this be the first brave act that results in them doing a little bit better politically? And might it create a habit in them to be a little bit braver politically.
All I can promise you is that, as you know, Best of Britain and I will be there every step of the way, holding their feet to the fire on delivering on all of the promises that were made on this momentous day, as they described it themselves, making sure that we're connecting voters to their MPs, with businesses into government, both here and on the EU side. And I cannot stress how important it is, not only for business in the UK to find its voice, but also within Europe too. They've got their own domestic elections happening over the course of this review of the Trade and Cooperation Agreement. They're going to be feeling pressure from their own voters and their own industries too. So it's absolutely critical that we keep talking to everybody on both sides of the Channel and the Irish Sea to make sure that sense prevails, Alex. And I'm glad to hear you a little bit more positive today than you have done on the last couple of shows about Starmer's leadership. And it's really, good to know that you're feeling buoyed by something.
As I said, let's hope it engenders in them a sense that brave decisions are rewarded by voters, not cowardly and inauthentic ones. We heard this word a lot around Chancellor Scholz's big speech about defense that was described as the Zeitenwende speech. It's a German word that means the end of one period and the beginning of a new period. Today felt like a Zeitenwende moment. But if they look across to Olaf Scholz, they will find that not delivering on that sense of a changing of the times cost him very, very dearly at the following election. So it's really important for them to deliver what they promised today.
Well, listeners, thank you for our midnight mass musings, lending us your ears for them. We're going to be back on Thursday with the main show. We've got a great guest for you. We've got Marcia de Cordova, MP for Battersea. We'll be able to talk to her a lot more about all of this, plus plenty of other stuff. We're really grateful that you take all the actions in and around Europe that we've asked you to do. Today is very much your victory. And as Alex has said, it's the beginning, not the end. So we will be coming back to you with plenty more things you can do to keep the government focused on delivering even more for us in the reset. But for now, we'll say cheerio, and we'll both try and get some very much needed sleep.
Yeah, we're not going to sleep, though, are we? We're both going back to work, so.
Well, yeah,
because I'm going to be covering your socials until at the very least Newsnight, so I've got a few hours. I've got a few hours to go, but anyway, I'll be doing that while editing this and trying to put it out as quickly as possible. And if you appreciate our work, remember that you can back us on ko-fi.com/Quiet Riot Pod. So we'll be back on Thursday. Until then, we love you.
Au revoir, auf Wiedersehen, goodbye, adios, I can't think of it.
Arrivederci. And
say it in Greek.
Yassas.
Yassas, everyone. We love you. Bye.
Quiet Riot is an audio production by Cooler Heads with Naomi Smith and Alex Andreou. Produced by Kenny Campbell. Music by Mariana Sangeeta. Artwork by Simona Canelu. And edited by me, Alex Reese. Quiet Riot is a co-production with Sandstone Global.
Quiet Riot. Can you hear that fucking dog?
Yeah, that's the neighbour one, isn't it?
Yeah, that they let it out in the garden and then don't care to call it back in. It's stopped now. Okay.
In state and local government, tech upgrades aren't optional. They're essential. Whether it's improving digital services, protecting public data, or modernizing outdated systems, the demand for skilled IT professionals has never been higher. CBT Nuggets helps you stay ahead with affordable, on-demand IT training that's built for your schedule. Our short, practical videos and hands-on virtual labs make it easy to build real-world skills in networking, cybersecurity, cloud technologies, and more. You don't need expensive hardware or complicated setups, just a browser and the motivation to grow. Whether you're an IT admin, public service tech, or new to the field, CBT Nuggets gives you the tools to better support your team and your community. And with new content added regularly, there's always something relevant to learn. Join thousands of learners who are upgrading their skills and advancing their careers. Start your 7-day free trial today at cbtnuggets.com. Because smarter tech skills don't just help you, they help your whole community succeed.